Hey everyone, so One Piece chapter 1103 just came out, and having just concluded the best flashback in One Piece, I think this chapter carried that energy and cut back to the current events and gave us pretty much exactly the type of chapter we want after that flashback. So what do I mean by that? I think that this chapter delivered in three major things that were kind of a necessity in the wake of how the Kuma flashback ended. And real quick, if you're liking the stylish look of this sweatshirt, you can get it for yourself in the Morge store, along with other hoodies and t-shirts. And you can get yourself a one-of-a-kind puzzle of all the major One Piece characters in the Morge store as well, link in the description below. So to begin with, understanding where Bonnie is at emotionally right now, and kind of this stage of her emotional journey, having just seen all of the memories of her father. So this was kind of a big missing piece for the longest time, because during that long night that we basically cut away from at Egghead Island, one of the major events was Bonnie touching Kuma's memories. And at the time, we weren't even really that invested in Bonnie's storyline, because she was just the side character throughout the arc that kept having her own main mission of trying to find out what happened to her father and everything like that. And she had this big dramatic moment of touching the memories, and then it was just never followed up on. And the next time we saw her, she was actually in a much better mood. She was way happier. And we're like, what could she have seen in there that actually made her happy and feel good about herself? Whereas what we would have assumed is that the memories were really dark. But it turns out that no, the reason that she is happy, and one of the big things that was missing from her for so long, was just understanding. Bonnie wanted to understand what Kuma had done, why he had left her, why she was having to search the ocean by herself, what had happened to her father, and why he would abandon her the way that he did. Having that understanding, that sense of closure for her was, even though she found out the reasons were really, really dark and really bad, the sense of closure that she got from that was something that basically turned her whole perspective on her last 2-3 years of her life around. And that is why the Bonnie that we saw, afterwards, Luffy was commenting, why are you so much happier now? What happened? Some people were even speculating that that was Katarina Devon, myself included, because it was like, yeah, she couldn't have just seen those memories and turned out to be in a much better mood than she was before. Shouldn't she be devastated? We all assumed that those memories were really dark, and the thing is, yeah, they were, but they also showed the picture of basically the kindest, most loving father in the history of fathers. So of course the Bonnie that we got after that was a much happier Bonnie than we'd seen up till that point in time. And of course it helps explain the sense of rage and anger that she'd been feeling for so long, right? When Bonnie showed up at Egghead Island in the first place, she was so angry at Vegapunk, and rightfully so. What had Vegapunk done? And now when she charged in to attack Saturn right before the flashback began, now we feel so much more for what she was going through when she made that decision. We understand so much more why she's feeling the way that she is right now. The anger, the helplessness, all of it. And I feel like this chapter helped sort of reframe Bonnie for us now in the wake of the flashback, because what it started to do is basically, you got a lot more imagery of Bonnie as a child in this chapter, both between the start of the chapter when she's hugging Vegapunk and thanking him, and then at the end of the chapter when she's being protected by Kuma, almost completely, crushed by Saturn, she's in child form again. It makes sense that Oda's sort of shifting our perception of her back from being this, this brave adult pirate captain to who she actually is, which is all along she's just been this lost little child looking for her father. And that's the real character. That's the true Bonnie that's been hiding under this facade this entire time. We also got this particularly telling revelation about where she's at mentally with her character when we got the explanation for how her fruit ability works, which is that she can turn into any future that seems to be perceived as possible. Maybe either literally possible or perceived as possible, I'm not quite sure. But any future that is in the realm of possibility, I suppose, from a certain standpoint, that is something that she can turn into. And as she learns more and more that she can't do certain things, or that certain things are not possible, it seems that those future possibilities are stripped away from her fruit's repertoire of things that she can turn into. That is such a fantastic ability because it fits the idea of a child's imagination so perfectly. It is the perfect fruit for a kid to have, because when you're a kid, what you're thinking about is, what will I be when I grow up? The world is full of possibilities at that point in time. It's a magical, dreamlike place. You could be anything in theory. You could turn into anything in theory. You could grow up to be whoever you want. But as you grow up, the possibilities start limiting. They start becoming tighter and tighter in your head of what you could actually achieve, what is real or isn't real. It's the perfect fruit for a kid, and I love that Oda thought of that fruit as being Bonnie's fruit. It's sort of a miniature version of what Luffy can do, because Luffy is also sort of this free-spirited, imaginative fruit ability, and Bonnie's fruit takes that same concept, but takes it and puts it in a sort of child's perspective, a child's imagination perspective. So it's kind of like, you know, at a certain age, Bonnie could imagine herself one day becoming Santa Claus, and then at a certain age, when she's 15 or 16, that possibility, that ability of her to transform into Santa Claus probably goes away. And I think we're kind of seeing the same thing happening with the Nika fruit, which she, interestingly, seems to be losing the ability to turn into at the same time as she slowly seems to be losing faith in the possibility of a brighter future where this heroic warrior can come in and save them. She's starting to lose faith in that belief because the world has just been so harsh and so difficult, and she's seen the cruelty of it over and over again, both between what's happened to her and having just witnessed the memories of what's happened to her father. So it's very dark but meaningful that for a kid, Bonnie's setting off into this world of bright adventure and possibilities, and then as she learns the truth, the harsh reality of the world, that sort of childlike view of this magical fantasy place where this heroic warrior could exist, it's slowly fading away. And it is sadly how, you know, just the natural experience of growing up works like, which is that when we are little, as I said, we could imagine so many things as being real. And as we grow up, suddenly the world stops being such a fantastic, magical place, and we begin to realize the harsh reality of what can and actually can't happen. So right now, Bonnie's fruit is at this sort of turning point, where she seems set to lose certain possibilities and powers as just her faith in certain things wanes. And that's why we're at such a perfect point for Luffy to wake back up and show Bonnie hope again, to show her magic, freedom, imagination, all of that again, to show her that Nika is real, to reignite that sort of spark of imagination and belief that she has sort of started to lose. So amazing chapter for Bonnie. Luffy stuff, I think we still have maybe a chapter or two to go before he reawakens, so we will get to him later. But first I want to talk about Saturn and Kuma. So, this chapter also did a phenomenal job, not just of setting up Bonnie, the main character, her perspective, reframing our understanding of her, it also did a perfect job nailing in Saturn as the perfect villain that we really want to see defeated at this moment in time. It really feels like although Kuma went through a lot throughout his life, suffering many misfortunes in many various contexts, we now sort of understand, and it's sort of spelled out for us, that Saturn was in many ways the root cause of all of it. Sure, Saturn wasn't the celestial dragon that, you know, killed his father and his mother, but Saturn is reflective of the celestial dragons. Saturn is also the one who specifically caused Ginny's death, and he's the one that's caused the situation right now with Kuma being a robot, Bonnie being where she's at, and Saturn himself about to kill Bonnie in this very moment. I think what we want right now, more than anything, once we're coming off this tragic flashback with all of these heavy emotions, is to see some sort of retribution, some sort of justice. We want to see, like, when we're filled with a lot of sad, dark emotions, I think it's just human nature to want to see that directed in a certain direction, right? To see things be fixed, sometimes with a violent component to them, and in this case, we really want to see, like, all this emotion, sadness we're feeling, we want it expelled with sort of rage and punishment towards Saturn. So Oda did sort of perfect redirection of viewers' emotions this chapter, where we're coming out all sad and everything like that, and with this chapter he kind of turns it all over and he's like, well, it's that guy's fault. Don't you want to see something bad happen to that guy? And that's exactly what you want to see coming out of a tragic backstory. It's the same sort of emotions that I felt when we wrapped up Nami's backstory, and the very next chapter is basically Luffy showing up at Arlong Park being like, which one of you is Arlong? So we're hopefully going to get a scene like that very soon with Luffy's reawakening, but before we can get to Luffy, there's one other guy who wants to get his punch in, and that's Kuma. So after everything that Kuma went through, what we wanted to see is basically him getting something back at Saturn, right? And I always want, or at least be able to help his daughter in some way. I think even more than just, because Kuma's a very pacifistic person, even now, I don't really need to see him get something back against Saturn. It's going to be very satisfying, of course, but the bigger thing that's hitting hard with this chapter for me is getting to see him protect Bonnie, because I know that that's what he cares about more as well at the end of the day. And to see Kuma, like, we all knew that Kuma's coming to Egghead at a certain point. We all knew that he's going to do something here. To see it be basically coming in, swooping in, taking the blow for his daughter, much in the same manner, in the same framing as when Ace took the blow for Luffy from Akainu at Marineford, to get that same sort of visual symbolism, and then follow that up with what seems to be like a mirror image of that other iconic moment in that same Marineford saga of Luffy punching the Celestial Dragon. I think we're going to get those two sort of moments back to back, and it is certainly going to be one of the most satisfying moments of the series for a character who has all his life basically suffered and suffered and suffered, and is now finally going to give some suffering back. And I think that this was the perfect chapter for framing where Kuma is at right now, I guess mentally or as a person, and also one of the key ideas of the Egghead Island arc and One Piece in general, which is just the power of the human spirit. Right, the power of that which cannot be taken away. That's what was said at the very beginning of the arc, that they can't quite seem to change human spirit, or at least the spirit of living things, no matter what they do. And we're seeing that right now, because up till now, everything Kuma did in his robot form, right, even the rebellious acts that he took, like flying over to Marijua, climbing up Marijua, you know, attacking the Celestial Dragons, etc., running away from there, all of that, it seemed, it was clearly coming from a place of his own will, right, not being programmed to do anything. It was clearly his own will fighting through, but it still felt all somewhat robotic and kind of like a shell of himself as he did it, right? Like there was one last little bit of himself that was pushing him to do these very basic step-by-step acts. This chapter, it felt as though you could feel the real Kuma experiencing all of this and actively choosing what to do, and it felt like we're seeing him as the person, not just this mindless robot that's a shell of itself. It felt like everything that he does here is basically his spirit just bursting out and taking over his body once more to protect his daughter, to fight back against the evil, oppressive Celestial Dragon that has plagued him since his childhood. I think this moment with Kuma hammers in the themes of this arc perfectly. And interestingly, there's a really great point that one of my top tier of patrons made regarding Kuma along those lines in this chapter. So let's quickly cut over to the voice of the people. So Meek pointed this out. Throughout Kuma's life, he frequently asked others, if you traveled somewhere, where would your destination be? But now at the end of his life, that same question is finally being asked of Kuma by Dragon. That is such a clever callback that I completely missed. And it says so much because Kuma has always asked people where they would like to go, because Kuma is a kind-hearted person. He's always looking out for everybody else. He wants to help them with his abilities. That was what the first thing that he did when he got his ability. It was freeing all those slaves that were trapped and going to be massacred and killed at God Valley. And that was explicitly what he said he wanted to use his fruit for. Every single time that we've seen Kuma teleport a person throughout the story, it's been to make their life better. He asked Perona, where would you like to go? He teleported her to the perfect island for her. He teleported all of the Straw Hats to the perfect island for them. He's been using his fruit exactly like he wanted to save people. So when he asks, where would you like to go? It's not a threatening or intimidating question. It is coming from a genuine place, and it reflects the fact that Kuma is always looking out for other people. This is the first time that it's about where Kuma wants to go, where Kuma is choosing to spend his last moments of his life, where he wants to be and who he wants to protect more than anyone else. I think that that is one of the most brilliant, subtle little lines and turns of phrase that Oda has used throughout the story. Kuma constantly asking, where do people want to go? And now having that very quietly flip back to reflect him and his final moments in the story. So great point by Meek. And Oslo is also coming in with a good point. Kizaru made a light speed run to the pantry, which is funny, but it's also an extremely important part of the chapter, which is that it is heavily implied that the person that gave Luffy food was Kizaru of all people. I think we've all been talking for a long time about the potential major character change that Kizaru could have by the conclusion of this arc, which is absolutely awesome. He is not a character that most of us would have expected would ever turn against the Marines by the end of the story, but here we are today. I've dropped a video talking about that, Kizaru, the admiral who sold his soul, and the potential for his character growth, and here we're starting to go see it. Now, it's not like we're at a point where Kizaru is going to make this grand stand against Saturn and just jump in the way of Saturn and start attacking him and actually fighting back. We're not quite there yet. However, Kizaru is now seeing things sort of spiral to a point that he did not want. He barely wanted to kill Vegapunk. We still don't know for sure whether or not he would have even followed through on that order, but at the very least he was very reluctant to go kill even Vegapunk. However, we know that he was not going to kill Sentomaru, right? He took care of Sentomaru without doing anything lethal, and he made very clear that he did not even want to hurt Bonnie. He told her that up front when Bonnie tried to attack him. So, now that he's seeing that Sentomaru is in danger and Bonnie is about to be killed, Bonnie a child, while Kizaru is not stepping up to fight back and take care of things himself, he's doing the next best thing, which is as subtly and quietly as possible, he is rebelling in the most shifty way that he possibly can, which is helping Luffy ever so quietly get back up on his feet, because Kizaru knows that if anyone can do something about this, it's Luffy. So it's not like Kizaru is openly rebelling himself, but he is shifting circumstances around just a bit to make it much more likely that things don't work out for Saturn and that Bonnie could be saved in the end. Does this lead to something more explicit and overt down the line? Who's to say? But I have high hopes for Kizaru this arc. So that's all for this video, and I will talk to you all next week. And don't forget to get your One Piece inspired clothing and a puzzle for yourself in the Mord store, link in the description below.